right, everybody. I guess we're just going to get started. So my name is Sean Clercq. I'm the founder and CEO of Kickfurther. I used to run a merchandising company trying to get into retailers and selling into vendors like these guys. And then I created the inventory funding solution that I wish existed when I was selling products. So that's what brought me here today. I'm joined by John Lawson and Natalia. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Well, I'm Natalia Sereno. I'm on the merchandising vendor development team at Target. And so what that means is that I help identify women and diverse-owned brands, and then I help them engage with Target at the right time and place based on our merchant strategies. And then we help you navigate the Target waters, if you will, as you grow and thrive at Target.
Cool, and I'm John Lawson. I'm the senior local forager at Whole Foods Market Northeast. So my job is identifying, partnering with, supporting, and mentoring locally based and locally manufactured suppliers who are looking to get onto the shelves of Whole Foods Market. So I know I've worked with some of you folks in the crowd here, and hopefully I'll be working with more of you.
All right, awesome. So I know what everybody in the audience wants to start with is, how do we put our best foot forward to get into Whole Foods or to get into Target? So maybe we could start with you, Natalia. What's the best way to put, your best foot forward as a vendor?
So I would say that there are a few key places to engage with a Target. One, at trade shows and conferences. So good job being here. Because we certainly attend. We're always out looking for innovation. The other thing is through our own websites and platforms. So we do have our supplier intake form, which is a fantastic place to go. Everyone thinks, I'll dispel the myth, it is not a black hole. We actually really do look at that database all the time. So not only should you put your information in there, you should make sure that it's updated, because a lot of brands will enter the information and just set it and forget it. But your business grows all the time, and we want to hear about it, because that may open the window up to new opportunities that might align with what you've got going on in your business. So I recommend to set a little reminder for an annual check-in, or 6 months, or something exciting like expansion of doors. So definitely keep those profiles up to date. We also really attend a lot of our certification conferences. My team in particular focuses on women and BIPOC brands. So any certification conferences nationally, we are there. We are, one-on-one. And so, yeah, I would say those are the really, really big ones in order to stand out and engage with us.
All right, awesome. How about John, Whole Foods?
So on Whole Foods, we have a lot of portals that you can engage in. We have a supplier portal, similar to what Natalia was talking about, where you can go and pull down information on how to submit your products. We are category-based, whether you're looking to submit locally or for a whole region or nationally. So you want to know the category review calendar. So when the category for your product comes up, you want to make sure you're hitting those due dates and submitting the correct paperwork. For local products, if you're a small local supplier, you definitely want to engage with the local team. We have a lot of programs for local brands. You can submit your information about your brand through our website. You can reach out to us directly, and we'll review your products. We will keep you on a category on the category review calendar, so you do need to submit by category, but we're definitely looking for products that are ready to go to market. So that means things as basic as having a UPC from Whole Foods Market perspective, making sure that your ingredients are compliant. We have a pretty rigorous quality standards program. Everything from labeling on your product to the ingredients that are in your product, you need to make sure that they meet Whole Foods Market standards. So that's a really important one. And there's a lot of information. Our supplier portal has a ton of information that you can go in and actually find out different areas that you can focus on to make sure that your product is compliant for that first step of presenting for the category review.
All right.
I'll just add one more thing. So if you're, from the Target perspective, if you are not quite yet at that stage where you might have those UPCs and things like that, you can also engage with our accelerators program. They have different programming, which is tailored to depending on where you are in your retail journey. So that's also a great resource if you're looking to engage with a target.
Awesome. So I heard conferences, trade shows, the supplier portal, actually use it, read what's on there, right? Follow the rules. Do you guys have opinions on distribution consultants? I know the founders in here are getting emails like, hey, pay me $1,000 a month, I'll get you into Target. Like, does that strengthen or weaken the position of an entrepreneur, in your opinion? We'll start with John.
Yeah, I mean, I would say be careful of who you're spending that money with, because that money is probably spent better somewhere else. Anyone who's going to promise you that they can get you into retail is probably over-promising and potentially under-delivering. So, I think trade shows are really one of the best ways to engage with buyers. I mean, a good buyer is going to be totally willing to have a conversation with you, albeit a quick conversation. You always have to be respectful of time. But this is what my brand is, this is what we're trying to do, and give me a few points of advice on how I can sort of sharpen my pitch to get in. But I think the one-on-one, I'm the founder. Have your story ready. What's your story? Like the story of your brand should be compelling, but it should be elevator pitched. So you want to be able to have a quick hit to talk about what is the story that makes your brand compelling, because really differentiation is key in any category. Number one question I get is, what is the white space in Whole Foods? And there really, white space is all sort of covered at this point, but you have to look around the corner, look behind the mosaics that are there to find what's actually white space, and you'll find that maybe it's a category that seems cluttered, but you have an innovation in that category. So you want to focus on what your differentiation is and your story that's going to make that differentiation compelling to a customer. And then the last part of that is your label. How does your package, which is your basically billboard on the shelf, how does that package tell that story to the customer on the shelf, surrounded by all the other brands on the shelf? So, and you want to be able to put that in front of someone very quickly and say, can you help me refine this? So when you go to make that formal pitch or presentation, you've gotten that feedback, and you're sharper going in.
Yeah, I would agree with all you said. I would say that we do have a lot of brands that do engage with distributors, and so it's not necessarily that it's a bad thing, but I think that you should interview a distributor, a rep group, or anyone else that is joining your team, because essentially that's what they're doing, to fill whatever gap you are trying to fill or to compensate for. So I think oftentimes people overpromise of, I'm going to get you in the door. And really what you need to get in the door is all the things that you mentioned of differentiation, a great product, and an ability to get it to the store on time, and for you to deliver on what you promised that buyer. If you have a need for someone to distribute, if you have a need because of bandwidth and because of the way your team is structured, where you need additional support, I would say yes, engage with a rep group or anyone who's going to help you scale your business. But I would also be mindful of making sure that you're interviewing them as you would anyone who you're hiring on your team, to make sure that they are a good fit for your brand, that they have expertise in what you're trying to accomplish. And as far as the differentiation piece, I know that's a huge thing for us, so I absolutely echo everything you said. White space, making sure that, I would say to that point where, what is white space? How do you differentiate yourself? Whenever I meet a brand and I ask, who's your competition? If your answer is no one, you have some homework to do. There is apps, and it doesn't mean that it's the same product as yours. So I don't want to make it sound like, oh, they make the same product as me. They might not. But even when iPods came out, there were no other iPods. But we all had Discmen. So there was someone filling a need that was very similar. So there's always a competition. And so you want to know and be very honest with yourself on how you stack up against that, whether it be pricing, product, filling the need, what are you solving for? Because that's ultimately what the buyer is looking for. Whether it's a rep group telling the story or you just wanted to be really clear on what that is, that's what would get you in the door.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So I want to move a little bit deeper into the conversation. So you got the meeting, met a buyer at a trade show, now you're meeting with them, right? And there's a sticky part where it's like, what's the price of the goods? And it's really tough for entrepreneurs, right? Because you're starting, you have low quantities, your costs are higher, and you want to make sure that you're getting into Target or Whole Foods. You want to put your best foot forward, but you need to have the margins to make sure that your business can grow. So do you have any advice to offer the entrepreneurs about how to think about pricing when they're meeting with buyers for the first time from, let's start with Target this time, Natalia.
Sure. So I would say, one, understand what is accessible and what will be successful on the shelf. Because oftentimes, because of all the limitations that you mentioned, people will say like, oh, well, this is like a $10 chocolate bar or something like that. And that's going to be really hard to sell. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but I think when you should know the venue that it's at. In a boutique, it's probably a lot easier. At a Target where you have things that are priced at $1, that's going to be really tough. Whether you're going to have, it's going to be a much bigger lift on that packaging, on the marketing or brand storytelling. That's going to have to really do like the heavy lifting to get that out the door. So I would say, one, know what quantities you're going to be working at. And that takes like a conversation with yourself, right? Like, what kind of quantity can I handle at this moment? And price it at that. Because if you're selling at a much smaller scale, let's say through your own e-commerce, and you're pushing, 100 units a week, that's a very different pricing model than if you're pushing 1,000, 50,000, et cetera. So I would say price it as if you're engaging with Target, because that's who you're pitching to, and that's the numbers you'll be working at. So that may change things for you. But also be realistic of what kind of workload and bandwidth your company currently has, and make sure that those things are aligned. And I would say work from there. And the other thing that I often kind of tell my brands to pause is that make sure that you're taking in the overhead for all of these operations. So if you don't have GS1 UPCs, if you don't have a distributor, if you don't have a 3PL and you might need one, I would say make sure that you're doing all of that math up front first, so that you are covering those margins that are going to be very important down the line. And you don't want to have that, oh my gosh, I forgot to factor that in after you've had a conversation with the buyer, after you got all these things in motion, everyone's excited, and then you have to go back, and then that can be a little bit of a friction point. So definitely always, under promise, over deliver versus the inverse.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to double click on something you said there, because I'm a supply chain nerd. So it's like, if you're selling to Target, you can go to your supplier and ask, what's my price discount going to be if I'm selling to Target, right? Because that's a lot more quantity. And then you can leverage that in the conversation with Target to secure that deal, right?
Absolutely.
That's really good advice.
And you can negotiate, right? Like I always say, you should be treating every conversation as a negotiation, whether it's the buyer, the supply chain, the 3PL, the EDI provider, all of that. So yes, absolutely, use that. And you might also bump into I don't even know if I have the capacity to service the Target. You might need to go find somebody else, because they may be servicing the current need you have and not, you might be assuming that they can do that. So I think that is a great point, and it can open up a lot of other conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So John, anything to add on pricing in terms of those initial negotiations?
Yeah, I think the things you have to keep in mind are you have to know your audience. When you're going in to talk to any retailer, you have to have done research in that retailer. Where does your product fit in on the shelf? Is it a premium product? Is it a value product? Is it somewhere in between, super premium, whatever? And you have to know that price point is part of the package on the product. The price point is, you've designed that label. You and your team have put days, nights, weekends into designing this perfect label, but that price point is very much part of the label. And if you underprice or overprice to the category, then you're going to lose the customer right off the bat. So you want to make sure you're focusing your price point on the target retailer that you're going after. Another thing you want to consider is know your supply chain. Can you leverage the supply chain a little bit to your point to say, I can get a contract or a PO from Whole Foods or Target or whomever, and can your supply chain support that? It's sort of like an in-kind investment in the brand. So you also want to think about distribution. A lot of our suppliers at Whole Foods come in to us as local self-distributed brands. Make sure if you get that PO, if you get picked up for a store or a set of stores, and you're distributing yourself, make sure you're paying yourself for that distribution, because that markup, that distribution markup, what happens is if you succeed and you grow and you shift over to distribution, you have to shift that markup over to distribution. If you aren't factoring in that markup, oh, well, I'm just walking the product over, or I'm just driving my car over and dropping it off, then when you get into distribution, all of a sudden your cost of goods into the retailer are going to spike, because now the distributor adds their markup to the cost. So, and that's one of the number one things that I find small and emerging suppliers who are moving from self-distributed into distribution, it's a stumbling block with them. So just always keep that in mind. The biggest thing really is go into the store and research. Look at your product next to the other products in the stores. Make sure you have those differentiated call-outs on the product itself. If you're using fair trade, organic, if you're a woman-owned business or minority-owned business, like make sure you're getting those call-outs on the front of your package, because those are differentiators that can lift you from a value to a premium to a super premium brand. So those are things that can justify your price point, and you can underprice too. If you make your price point too low, you don't have any room to get more competitive in that space. And last of all, focus on your promotional planning as well. You want to invest in promotions. We call them TPR, temporary price reduction. You want to make sure you're investing in the yellow tag in Whole Foods so that you can discount to the customers, because that's part of your marketing strategy. So you want to make sure you're setting aside for that in your price point as well, in your cost and retail.
Yeah. All very good points. It makes a ton of sense. So I would say one of the trends that it feels like we're seeing now is businesses that start with e-commerce, they build up a bit of a following, and then they take that into wholesale distribution. And I'm curious, how valuable is that in these conversations with buyers to say, hey, I already am selling at this price, which is why you'll be able to sell it at this price? Or is that not so convincing because retail is different from e-commerce?
I mean, I can start. I find it incredibly valuable because it shows proof of demand right off the bat. If you're selling it with a minimal kind of platform or a smaller platform, it certainly means that people are looking for you, or you're doing something really well to reach out to them. So certainly it's a great starting point. It also can really help develop the conversation as far as, well, where are you selling, right? So then you can take a more strategic approach as to how you're going to roll out to a store. So you may start off in a more segmented way because you have traction in, say, the Northeast or in the South or in California or what have you. And so then you come to the table with some data that may spark some additional thoughts for that buyer. You may also start adding value, like how you bring value to a target. I have a really strong following with a customer that you want and I have. Right. I love to hear that. I would love to have everyone shopping, in a Target run. So if you know something I don't know, tell me. I would say, I'll take the opportunity to say that I have yet to see a buyer that is like, oh, I don't want to see you at this other retailer. If you do well elsewhere and you're building your brand and building brand recognition and a following, I welcome it. I love it. I want to hear all about it. Because the more the customer gets accustomed to your product, the more that they recognize it, the more that they want it, that they need it, and it fulfills their need, it just makes it that much more successful at when it's on our shelf. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Natalia said. There's a logical shift from DTC into retail, and you want to make sure you're managing that shift, and you want to make sure that when you go in to sell your successful DTC product into retail, that you're really able to talk about what have you accomplished in building your brand, in building the product that's the core of that brand, and talk about the customers who are drawn to that, and how you can use the platform that you've built to support the retailer that you're going into. Because from the Whole Foods Market side, what I'm excited to see is a brand that I can put into the store and have that brand actually leverage their following to bring customers into Whole Foods Market, because that means sales not just for your brand, but for other brands that are adjacent or complementary to that. And I think that's a very compelling case to be made. So all that research is a successful, with some limits, but a successful proof of concept in that category.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think it's interesting because that's a path you can get started on, very low cost, right? As opposed to opening up a wholesaler relationship, very capital intensive. So very interesting there. So I want to shift gears a little bit, right? Let's say now you're in Target, you're in Whole Foods, right? You opened up the first few doors. What are the ways that a vendor can really optimize and maximize that relationship and be a good vendor? Or, if you care, what are some warnings on how to not be a bad vendor? You know what I mean? Let's start, Natalia, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I would say, even before your product gets into the store, but you've opened the doors of conversation, there's interest from the buying side, I would say just make sure that you're at an agreement and very clear on expectations so that you can maximize the relationship. Because I think that the part that's often skipped over or glossed over a little bit, because there's a lot of excitement from both sides of like, oh, great, we found a product, we love it, let's launch it everywhere. And I think there's a moment where vendors should think, wait, what can I knock out of the park? Because that first impression is really important. And so I will clarify, the first order is not the hardest part. That's the easy part. But you want to make sure that you knock it out the park so that the following things that come after are not as hard as it already is, because that is the hardest part. Right. And so I would say make sure that you're at the table and making sure that you are agreeing to a relationship that you can maximize, that will be positive, and that is set up for success. And what that means is being strategic about where you're launching. I don't know, I personally, maybe unpopular opinion and maybe controversial, but I don't recommend launching in all doors for a nationwide chain for any emerging brand. It is very rare that we do that, and I think that's for a reason. It is much easier to learn from a couple hundred stores than a couple thousand stores. Those mistakes are really costly, and so it's a much less expensive mistake when it's a smaller mistake. And again, that goes on both sides. It's expensive for both sides of and that's not a great way to start a relationship. You really want to build a good foundation and then start scaling from there, right? So I would say sustainable growth tends to be slow and steady and very strategic. And so the strategy should really make a lot of sense for both sides, because that's how you get that sustained partnership. And so I would really look at it as a partnership. I also tell brands, don't be afraid of saying no. If the buyer is super excited, let's get you in 800 stores, and all the things we talked about, a supply chain and all of that, is not adding up to 800 stores, no is the beginning of a negotiation. You should absolutely feel comfortable saying, I'd actually rather do 200, and these are the 200 I'm thinking because of that traction I have at this retailer or on my e-commerce or X data point that you have. And usually if there's data that stands behind it, the buyer will work with you. Right. So I would say that make sure you're setting up the relationship first so that you can maximize it, and then make sure that you deliver on all of the metrics that you guys agreed upon. What your turn rate is going to be, what kind of POs are you fulfilling into, what is the cadence of things, what kind of communication cadence should be established with the buyer, how often do they want to hear from you, when are they expecting to see newness. All of those things you can establish up front, and that way you can deliver.
Yeah, it's like a lot of brands feel like getting into Target is making it, but that's not the finish line. It's almost like that's the start of the race, right? You got a marathon to go. John, anything to add?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. It seems like it's the hardest thing to get in, and that's going to feel like the hardest thing, but that's actually the easy part. After you get on the shelf, that's the hard part. And I like to sort of analogize that to a long straight road. When you're on the highway and you're driving, I don't know, let's say Las Vegas to Los Angeles, and it's a long straight road, and you just don't know when it's going to end. It's that long straight road that's the hardest, because it's very redundant. You just got to get in and support. You've got to review your reports every week. Make sure you're filling voids. Make sure that your supply chain is intact, that you have product available, that you're not having out of stocks through your distribution. Make sure that you're not having unexpected cost increases. You got to get in and demo that product week after week. You've got to promote that product in the stores. You have to be on the social media, posting your TikTok videos and your Instagrams, showing people how to use the product. The holidays come around. Everyone wants to put a holiday product on the shelf. Focus on your core set of products and sell those products as holiday products instead of adding another SKU that's going to take away sales from your everyday products. Focus on your core SKUs. day in and day out, year round, and figure out how to repackage them for healthy January and holiday in November and summer picnic. It's super important that you stick with, you make a strategy and you stick with that strategy and you execute that strategy every day, every day, every day. And it's a long straight road because it's a little redundant. You're sort of doing the same set of things over and over again. And obviously there are unicorn brands that just sort of take off vertically, but most suppliers are going to get in, and it's going to be a long, slow curve up. And just really reiterating what Natalia said about saying no, the most valuable tool in your arsenal is your ability to say no, is your ability to control your growth. If you're doing well in one region of Whole Foods, for example, and someone in Austin comes to you and says, we're going to put you in all the regions, you can say, no, how about we add on one more region instead? I'm a cautious growth guy. I've seen more failure from brands that try to sort of create that unicorn effect for themselves than suppliers who build one zone, one region, whatever, and then add on to that. Store by store, zone by zone, region by region is the stronger way to build a brand.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a gentle warning here of if you overpromise and underdeliver, that can damage and erode all of that work you've done to build that relationship. So be very careful around that.
I mean, it's ultimately you're building a relationship as you would a friendship or someone you're dating, right? There's a trust that's established. And if you break that trust, it's really hard to build that back up because it's a loss of sales on both sides.
Right.
And I would give you one red flag, which you kind of touched on, and I thought was a really good thing, like a warning, is or a myth, if you will. Stay away from thinking that because you've entered retailer X, the world is going to magically know that you're there and come flocking through the doors to find it. The marketing is very much on you. That growth is very much fueled by you. Of course, we want to see you succeed, but there's a lot of products on those shelves. So the marketing is very much driven by you, and that is a huge miss and a really quick way to also erode that relationship because the buyer is assuming that you already know that walking in. And so I often see that as a pitfall. So I would say that's my red flag warning.
Yeah, keep your foot on the marketing gas pedal.
Yeah.
And actually, one other thing that's really important is communication and transparency. A lot of suppliers under-communicate. I didn't want to bother you. That's a problem because without that communication, the buyer doesn't know what's going on. On the transparency side, if there is an issue with your product, in my experience, it's better for you to proactively communicate an issue with your brand than for the buyer to see something in the numbers that there's something off, reaches out, oh yeah, we're having an issue with this. You can't hide from the numbers. You've got to proactively communicate your issues so that you can work on a solution together. A good retailer is going to help you work on a solution. We don't bring you onto the shelf to say, "Oh, you're having a solution. You're having an issue. You got to get out." We want to work with you on a solution because it's a win-win. If your product succeeds, we both succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of great advice shared here today. We're running up on time. I wish we had more, but why don't we take a few minutes here just to share any resources available to entrepreneurs that Target or Whole Foods can offer to get them started on this journey.
Yeah, I mean, we at Whole Foods Market, we have our LEAP program, which is our local emerging accelerator program. So that's our incubator program, and we have that for emerging brands, and we have it for on the verge brands. So emerging brands are brands that are not yet on the shelf, and on the verge is for brands that are on the shelf, and we're looking to expand them into more regions. I had mentioned before we have our supplier portal, supplier.wholefoods.com. And for brands that are already in our stores that are local, and local defined by locally manufactured and locally based, we have our local producer loan program. So definitely check that out. We can support brands with low interest local loans, and especially in this economy, that could be a huge advantage over a bank loan with higher interest.
Yeah, I would echo I touched on the accelerators program. And again, we have various tailored programming depending on where you are in your retail journey. So that's a fantastic resource. The other thing I would say about Target, and quite frankly, a lot of retailers out there, is look for those supplier diversity teams. Sometimes they have different names. So just go on their portals. Again, they are not black holes for most retailers anyway. There are people behind that. And so like I'm one of those people. So I really do work there. And we serve as additional advocates. We serve as sounding boards. We help like make sure that the strategies align and that it's a good fit. So I would say really use those resources because those departments are really there to help that incubation period or that alignment to make sure that it is a good fit for both sides. And that's such a huge part of what we were talking about. You don't want to get into into something that doesn't make sense for you. And then once you're there, we can serve again as advocates, as sounding boards, as people that can guide you through it, give you a little bit more context. And then just kind of like be there for you. I know being an entrepreneur is a very lonely place. And so supplier diversity departments tend to be a really great resource for that because like you said, if you succeed, we succeed. So it's really a mutually beneficial relationship and usually a really fantastic resource.
Yeah, it's really awesome that Whole Foods and Target are setting up these great resources for entrepreneurs. So thank you guys very much. And when you guys open up these stores and you're worrying about how to pay your suppliers, come check out Kickfurther. So thank you very much, John. Thank you, Natalia.